George Russell just came off a dominant victory around the Marina Bay Street Circuit, giving him his second of the season and the fifth of his career. Not only was his win dominating, he also set, in my opinion, the pole lap of the season. Well, it's either this or Leclerc in Hungary. If you've been watching my ratings videos, you know that I rate George very highly, and in my opinion, I think it's fair to say that he's been the second best driver this year behind Max Verstappen and ahead of Oscar Piastri. He's really shown that he's maximized every single opportunity he's been given. Sure, he may not have the best teammate right now, but when he was teammates with Lewis Hamilton, he beat him in 2 seasons to 1. And he's proved that he is really capable, and I think if he gets into a title fight with the likes of Verstappen or Charles Leclerc, he can definitely hold his own. And if I'm Mercedes, I would be dying to keep him. But, as we all know, they have other plans, so let's talk about it in today's video. Before we begin, 89% of you aren't subscribed, so what are you waiting for? Go subscribe. We're trying to reach 11,000 and follow me on Instagram. I feel like the expectation on Mercedes coming into this season was that of 0, because they lost Lewis Hamilton, and having a figure like him will instantly make your expectations sky high. I mean, just look at the expectation for Ferrari going to this year, although that's mostly down to them nearly winning the Constructors' Championship and not really Lewis Hamilton coming in. I think it's a mixture of both, but yeah, the expectation on Mercedes was pretty much 0. But there is good reason. They're the most inconsistent team in F1 at the moment. You think Ferrari's inconsistent? Sometimes Mercedes will be down there with the likes of Aston Martin, but sometimes they'll be up there with McLaren. And in Ferrari's case, they're P6 pretty much all the time, with the exception of Charles Leclerc on some occasions. But back to the point, the expectation was to see Russell and Antonelli drowning in their sorrow in the crappy Mercedes car, while Hamilton and Leclerc are fighting for the championship. Well, it's not really the opposite, because no one here is fighting for the championship, but it's Leclerc and Hamilton who are drowning in their sorrows. And when George Russell has an opportunity for a great result, he maximizes that opportunity every single time. You know, first 2 races of the season, finishing on the podium. Bahrain, his defensive masterclass on Lando Norris, who had a significantly better car, and he was doing all of that while he had signal issues. Azerbaijan, the insane undercut he had on Carlos Sainz after being behind Antonelli and Liam Lawson for most of the race. The only bad race from this year I would say that he had was Great Britain. But that could also be mostly put down to Mercedes gambling at the start, and I guess also Monaco, but again, his engine died in qualifying. So if you look at his results throughout the entire season, when nothing goes wrong, he finished in the top 5. It's quite literally just 2022 all over again. He has been super consistent this year, and I still don't understand people who don't recognize his talent. Sure, you can hate him if you want. I certainly used to dislike him, obviously after Imola and 2022, some races where he was just mindlessly driving to others. But he has matured as a driver since then, and honestly is one of the cleanest drivers on the grid as of right now. I can see the argument where he's probably not a top 2 driver on the grid. That could just be recency bias for me. But if you say that he's not top 4, that's just called hating. And I see a lot of George Russell hate on my feed, and I honestly don't get why it's taken this long for people to recognize how good he actually is. He's coming off the bat of the 2024 season where he was consistently day in and day out ahead of Lewis Hamilton in both the qualifying and the race. Sure, it's not the same Lewis Hamilton of old, but it's still Lewis Hamilton. It's still the benchmark when you are comparing a driver to another. And as for the name, I can't say on here stuff because I'm scared of getting demonetized. He hasn't really been doing that this year. I guess you can technically say the end of Canada, but he was trying to speed up the safety car, so this doesn't really count. In fact, Verstappen did those things to him in Spain. So with that being said, why doesn't he have a contract for next year? Well, Toto Wolff has a huge crush on Max Verstappen. And when I mean huge crush, he's had a crush on him since he was 17, which sounds borderline illegal. He's been wanting to poach Max Verstappen from Red Bull. He's been wanting Max to drive for the Silver Arrows for the longest time. And now that Red Bull are starting to slump, the opportunity to sign Max Verstappen is bigger than ever. And Who blames him? Max Verstappen is easily the best driver in the entire world right now. Any of the 11 teams on the grid next season would kill to have a driver like Max Verstappen, not only for his driving style, but his mentality, his championship experience. It would help any team. Any team would instantly become better when someone like Max Verstappen comes along. Well, we all said that about Lewis Hamilton with Ferrari, but there's something fundamentally wrong with the boards at Ferrari, which I'm making a video on that soon, so check out for that. Not only does Verstappen going to Mercedes help out Mercedes, I think it helps out Verstappen a lot. What's holding a lot of people back from saying Max is a top 3 or top 4 driver of all time is because he's only done it with one team. Historically, if you look at all the grades, they've managed to do it with more than one team. Hamilton with Mercedes and McLaren, Schumacher and Benetton and Ferrari, Prost with Williams and McLaren. Winning a championship with more than one team does not necessarily show that you're a better driver, but it shows that you can bring a championship winning culture anywhere you go. And that's what these 3 drivers have done. And I think Senna would have won another champion. He definitely would have won another championship with Williams had he not died in Imola. So if he joins Mercedes and immediately brings them back to their glory days, I would probably have him up there in like top 3 conversations, or maybe even potentially the greatest of all time. And I think a majority of F1 fans can relate to the sentiment. So a lot of us really do want to see Max Verstappen in Mercedes, and they already have George Russell, who I mentioned, in my opinion, is the second best driver right now behind Max Verstappen. So why not just have the 2 best drivers on the grid be teammates at the same time? Well,
got the grip that Rosberg has got. Oh!
Yeah, PTSD. George Russell and Max Verstappen being on the same team together would quite literally be Nico Rosberg and Hamilton version 2. Both being clearly championship caliber drivers, with one slightly better than the other, but the other can mount a good challenge on his day. Look what happened when they came to blows in Qatar last year. This would be a logistical nightmare for everyone at Mercedes, especially people who have been there since the Hamilton-Rosberg days. Well, I say that, but Oscar and Lando exist, but there's a difference. Oscar and Lando don't have the same edge. Drivers like George Russell and Max Verstappen have. That's why I think Russell and Verstappen are better drivers than Oscar and Lando. McLaren are also not the same as Mercedes. McLaren are such a controlled environment, even during a title fight. And once they let go of that control, look what happens in Singapore. And Mercedes, when their drivers can compete against each other, they don't use one as a guinea pig to the other. Sure, you're going to tell me Bottas and Hamilton, but Bottas in his absolute peak can put up a good challenge to Hamilton every 3 races or so, but he can never do that throughout the entirety of a season. It was a disaster between Hamilton and Rosberg, and it was even a disaster for a bit with Russell and Hamilton in 2023. Remember Spain qualifying? Remember Qatar? Singapore, I still think Hamilton would have won if he was ahead of Russell there. So there's that aspect where Russell and Verstappen will come to blows too many times, where internally the team will be a nightmare to work for. But I feel like that can sort of be aided, considering Mercedes have literally went through that before, so they know how to do things differently now when they have 2 top-tier drivers fighting for the championship in the same team. But that's not even the biggest issue from what's stopping a George Russell and Max Verstappen partnership. Kimi Antonelli is the heir to the throne of Lewis Hamilton and has been Mercedes' long-term project for a very long time now. Toto Wolff and the backing of Mercedes has invested so much into Kimi Antonelli, something like Charles Leclerc back in the day with Ferrari. And obviously, Mercedes wouldn't want their investments to go to waste, something similar to Alpine dropping Jack Doohan for Franco Colapinto. They spent so much money buying out Colapinto's contract, so they might as well put Colapinto in that seat, even though he's pretty much doing the same job as Jack Doohan. Shout out the Argentinian sponsors. So if Mercedes were to axe one of these drivers for Max Verstappen, it's very clearly George Russell, which would suck because it would mean that George Russell spent 3 years at Williams for absolutely nothing and looking for a new seat at a team that was supposed to be owned by him. He was supposed to be the one leading them forward. And all those years of grinding it out just for 4 mediocre years, rightfully so, I would be very pissed off with Mercedes. And where else would he go to? Aston Martin? Actually, that looks like a pretty good outfit for George. There's a silver lining in everything though, and that it's Verstappen looks very comfortable with Red Bull ever since Lauren Mekies came in. I feel like Christian Horner's departure was down to Jos Verstappen giving Red Bull an ultimatum. It's either him or my son. And rightfully so, they picked Max Verstappen. And Max Verstappen even came out a while ago saying that it was just rumors that he was going to join Mercedes with no actual substance. But the thing is, he didn't really have a choice but to stay at Red Bull. We all know about the performance clause and that he's free to leave if he wants to if he's P4 in the standings by the summer break, and he was P3 in the standings by the summer break. But I guarantee you, serious negotiations would have definitely been had if it was a contract year for Max Verstappen, especially considering that 2026 looks to be another 2014 where Mercedes will have the early power unit advantage straight out the gate. But unfortunately for him, he signed a really long-term deal with Red Bull that runs to the end of 2028, so he doesn't really have a choice but to stay with Red Bull, as I already mentioned. So with that being said, why isn't Toto Wolff offering George Russell a long-term extension? The current offer on the table is only a 1+1 deal with a performance clause that he must beat Kimi Antonelli by a certain amount of points. I honestly have never seen a contract like this handed out to a driver of George Russell's caliber, but here we are, I guess. It's super obvious that Toto Wolff is not done yet chasing Max Verstappen. He really wants to have him in that seat. Why else would he give George Russell a 1+1 extension? But honestly, fair enough to him. Why settle with the second best driver on the grid when you can have the clear-cut best driver not just in F1, but in all of racing? And that's just the world of racing. It is an unfair sport. You help rebuild a team from the ground up, but there's someone better lurking in the background who can pretty much dictate which team he drives for or who his teammates are. So is the George Russell-Mercedes contract situation messy? Yes. Is Mercedes disrespecting George Russell? Yes. Do a lot of F1 fans disrespect George Russell? Another yes. But is that just the unfair, unforgiving world of racing? The definitive yes. So guys, let me know down below what you think about the George Russell-Mercedes contract situation, if you think Mercedes are blatantly disrespecting him in hopes of getting Max Verstappen, or if you even think it's realistic for Max Verstappen to join Mercedes. But anyways, that will do it for today's video, and I'll see you next time.